Hello and welcome to Association Amplified. And we're back with another episode. And today we're going to be talking all about gating.
Yep. We're basically going to explore whether your content should be free for everyone, or maybe they got to buy you dinner first before they get at your tasty content.
Yeah, absolutely. And like on a surface level, it can be a pretty shallow topic, but I think actually more than ever, this is becoming a question, in my talks with association leaders. I think it comes up just about every day now, especially in the big overwhelming AI question. AI search is gobbling up all the information that associations have been generously putting out for a long time. And then ultimately the association is faced with kind of this question of like, well, do I just allow, the ChatGPTs, the Perplexities, the Claudes to kind of siphon off our information and present that to my prospective member, which is really going to cut me out of any sort of engagement opportunity? Or, do I guard all of that information and then try and, make that more a tangible part of my value proposition?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, gating's not a new idea for associations. Like the single sign-on has been a pretty standard association playbook move for the last 15 years. It does change every few years what our new kind of recommendation is based on what the online space is. And AI is the newest version of that. So it's never been a better time to look at it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with kind of traditional models that we've seen with associations is that you have a fairly open model when it comes to your content where non-members can be able to completely consume, say, written content up to a certain point, or video content, or even attend events, or you end up having more of a walled garden where, in practical execution, that looks like something that you're going to describe what membership gets access to, but you aren't actually really giving them a sample of that. There is a model where what you see in membership is visible, but may have those levels of gating. But there is another model where everything is gated behind. There is no levels. There's just membership.
Yeah, you want to be in here. You don't know what's in here, but trust me, it's really good in here.
Yeah, which is very common. It's not hard to find where you go to an association's website and you're reading about membership and you get 5 to 10 kind of bullet points, and that's kind of all really that you have in terms of a sampling of what membership's going to entail, opposed to actually having levels of gating where it's more open, but the association is defining a specific kind of line in the sand of where you need to be a member to get more out of it.
Yeah, and the winning strategy is definitely being really nuanced about where that line is now, because being at either end of the spectrum is really disastrous. You either get the no one's allowed in our club, but you don't know what's in here. Could it be valuable? I don't know. Or if you have ever tried to read something from a news publication and you get the first sentence and they're like, you wish you could read the rest of this article. Subscribe, baby, or whatever. And you're like, I don't know if this is any good. I was just doing some cursory research. Feels like that's asking a lot. And then on the other end, it's just everything we ever made is basically worthless because AI can just plunder it all and feed it back to you without ever going to the website, right? So what we're looking for is a really nuanced approach to where to draw that line so you don't get either end of the spectrum.
First of all, I always love the sassy impersonation.
I'm just mad at the whole internet is what's been coming out over the course of these episodes.
There's always the ongoing joke is the sass that injects into everything. But yeah, I mean, again, kind of going back to the original point is that this this distinction of where gating happens is becoming more relevant because of the gobbling up of information because of AI, right? So regardless if you're in the camp where you kind of have what I call a walled garden approach, or you do have some line in the sand in terms of how far a non-member can kind of get, I think this is still going to be relevant conversation. So diving into that a little bit further, I think like a good point to kind of talk about is that, especially as it pertains, but not limited to kind of more academic or maybe highly technical associations. So think of like medical or, engineering technology related associations. There's going to be people, when you think about your member journey, that, that maps on to kind of their career journey, is that they're kind of starting out, they're in the beginning, and the information that they're accessing or looking information for is kind of more shallow, maybe more broad. And we can imagine kind of real quick that, the further you are into your career, the more kind of narrow and deep you go. And that information is more topical, in terms of developments of where X, Y, and Z is happening in the current year. I guess just to dive into a general recommendation, and you give me your feedback on this, is that's kind of the sweet spot where you want to start defining what's gated, right? But there's some nuance because you have options in terms of how you gate it. I would say where the information is very emergent in your field, that's the really high value stuff, right? Like as far as the basic 101 information, like it's actually, in my opinion, still important to produce that stuff, because we can talk about like what's the positive side of AEO and what these engines are doing, or at least how to optimize for kind of a situation we can't change, I suppose. But where it's deep and where it's narrow is that's where your prospective member, where your current member is going to be really valuing quite a bit. And that's kind of the apex of where you're positioned to be the best resource for them, as far as leveraging your authority, your subject matter experts, to be someone that can people could really depend on for that level of information, if not straight up accreditation or continued education, something like that.
The low level content that you're describing, we often refer to it as fundamentals. And this is the kind of information that if it wasn't provided by you, honestly, it could be found anywhere. So you might as well leverage that as free or very lightly email gated content to try to just build your authority in the space. The people that are looking to access it, they don't have money anyway, is the honest, sad truth. They're not at the level of like spend money to make money. It's better to slowly build rapport and trust with that audience as like the trusted source of information, and then put your conversion point somewhere on the higher value content scale. I definitely agree. But we should cycle back and say the things of the content scale.
All right, so to kind of like anchor the rest of our conversation here, we've broke down gating into four main levels.
Yeah.
Level 1 being free and open to everyone, which is what, Breanna, you were just kind of mentioning, is like, what is that more broad information that's fairly shallow that, could come from you, it could come from someone else. Every association's a little bit different about, how opinion they're going to be on that. But
those could be actually fundamentals or marketing content. So any kind of like shorts or snippets or social media, anything that's about casting a net for reach is what you want to put in that area.
Yeah, and that's really the main benefit, which, we could jump into really thinking about, where does AEO, SEO fill into this, where that free open content is dual purpose, is that it's allowing you to produce content that can be optimized for AEO. So real quick, this kind of current situation that we're in as far as web traffic and, all these AI engines, is that basically globally traffic is down 60%. Some people argue it's down even more. So that's actually users that are just not clicking through to sites. They're just staying on these platforms and they're doing all their activity on them without ever leaving. So the pursuit of optimizing for AEO is really about kind of majoring in the minors, so to speak. So your overall traffic will find like your organic new traffic you'll probably have already seen that there's a pretty significant dip. So the question comes is that, do we want to optimize for actually getting citations and appearing in these generative results, where people can actually see like, oh, there's an authority on this, they click through, and then you kind of have that very first entry point of the member journey, which is a little bit of rewriting possibly of what the member journey is. So there's one scenario here is where they enter in through Perplexity or Claude or something like this, and that's how they discover you.
Mm-hmm.
So having it free, being seen as a marketing asset, both for the sake of let's make content that is valuable but shallow, to help market the association, as well as, I suppose the other tangible marketing value here is that, are we producing content by the numbers that is AEO and SEO optimized?
Yeah, it also gives you a chance, if you're producing frequent and free marketing, high level or just small tip content, is it gives people a taste that you are in the habit of producing quality content. Have you ever been in a situation where you go to a gated garden and you're like, I heard there's good content behind this gate. And then you get in there and it's like just a crummy little textbook or something. Not to say like textbooks are never good. Textbooks can be a great resource, but you were like expecting something really big because of the price tag. And then that's what you get, right? So it just helps build that trust in your brand if that point of conversion does potentially come down the road.
Yeah, think about that level one being a way of expanding your reach, marketing your association, showing off a little bit of value, teasing them of what's to come ahead, and ultimately that can live on your website where, hey, membership lives. So that's level one. Level two is, kind of traditional gating, having an email address to be able to put in by the user. And then now you can actually start tracking data on them about, what, depending on what systems you have in place, what pages they've been on previously before giving the email address. And then, of course, depending if they've agreed or what your regulations are, you can actually start marketing to them and start a nurture campaign.
Yeah, the value of this piece has to be commensurate with the value of them giving you their email address. So you have to be careful with this. They're not going to be giving their email address for like low value, like here's a top tip content. This would be a good move for sponsorship content because emails are kind of cheap. Maybe there's a half an hour of good content in there, but you don't want to make it like a paywall or a single sign-on or anything like that because you want the numbers to be high enough for the buy to be good for the sponsor. So that's a good line to draw there. A report, maybe like a white paper would be a great example. Proprietary research that's not excessively high value, like not something that the organization had to pay a ton for that they need to recoup investment on. That would be a good lead nurture data gathering.
I think like categorically one way to think about it is like, is the content actually giving something that's more like actionable, or is the content something that's topical and kind of actionable in the short term? Because that's going to be kind of more sought after. And the report is a good example of that, is that, it's timely. Someone's not going to be able to get that information unless they've actually given over their email address.
This isn't necessarily a rule, but I do think it should be a little longer because even just the time it takes to type in your email address, if the content is shorter than the time it took you to sign up to get the thing, I feel like that's going to leave a bad taste in their mouth.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that is a good one. You definitely don't want to be gating something that feels like a kind of moment. Yeah, it needs to be something of substance is I guess a good way to think about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is it kind of timely? Is it very actionable? Is it at least perceived that it's high value for people? It's really about creating carrots and sticks. And there's like some nuance to level two, the email gating is that, depending on what systems you have in place, you could actually get people to be able to at least have a taste of what it is that you're gating and just kind of cut them off. So if it's articles, you can only get so far. We've all experienced this online. But depending on what systems you have in place, you can actually do this with video. Like with our clients, we implement something similar to this. But that's something that you could even implement on your own as well. And that's always good too, because it can increase conversions of those gated pieces of content.
That's true. I just wanted to cycle back to what you said about the platform capabilities. Yeah, it's great to have a platform that does that all, so you can watch and then all of a sudden it's like X many seconds in, like you have to put in an email to go further, just like you see with newspaper publications. But anyone can do it just by making a 30-second cut and posting that and then saying you have to put in your email to get the full. The technology is nice to have to make it easier, but anyone can do it.
Yeah, there's definitely ways to create a system that works for you, even if you are kind of limited by what tech stack that you have. Mm-hmm. So moving on to level 3, member only. So that being content that is completely gated behind membership.
Yeah. So this one and the next one are the levels that we're treating as conversion points. So this is something that's actively adding value to your membership that there needs to be a tangible and obvious return on investment for. So a really good example for this would be continuing education content, like something that they need credits accruing to like maintain their professional standing, or courses that are actually laddering toward something that's going to get them into a new pay tier, or really proprietary insights and research, or even access to like a special forum or a special community could be considered gating at that tier. It has to be immediately obvious that this is something that is going to give them a return on investment.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, what are those items that almost in themselves justify membership and make it a no-brainer? If you're fortunate to kind of have some of those resources, then that's a pretty clear way to draw the line on what's membership only. You know, a gray area here is education-based content, where you can have a dual option there. Obviously, where maybe it's free for members but paid for non-members. That becomes a kind of recruitment leverage for you to put in there.
Or you can have courses where the introductory levels are free and then the finishing courses or like the submission of the exam is the gated content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another model that works. Absolutely. And then finally, we have level 4, which is paid.
Yeah, the pay-per-view. So that's the shiniest, most valuable content, the kind that even if you were a member, you would still pay a little bit extra to get. That would be mostly certifications, I would say, or events, because mostly members don't get free access to events. They usually have to pay to get in, right? What else would be like that highest tier, do you think?
Highest tier, well, I think that also the education applies. Any sort of round table can also apply. Depending on your industry, the report, depending on what type of report or industry insight, it could be something like that. You know, the reports, it's interesting because it actually works really good from a recruitment process, but it's also really high valued with your members. That is a decision everyone kind of has to choose for themselves.
I also clowned on textbook earlier, but textbook is sometimes the pay-per-view move.
Yeah, that's a really good one too, where if you have any sort of educational material, like in the form of a course or just the actual information. If you ever wondered how clearly your association's value shows up online, this is a good place to start. With the TaleWind Digital Audit, you submit your website and we review how your content, digital experience, and revenue opportunities are showing up today. You'll get a scorecard that highlights what's easy to find, what's harder to see, and where there are opportunities to improve. You can submit your website at talewinddigital.com/audit. Maybe something that would be useful when we're talking about AEO is like also to address SEO because the two are connected. So it is not like too daunting to kind of optimize for both because I think of it as kind of two circles that, overlap in the middle. But as far as going from SEO to AEO, it's probably worth unpacking kind of the arc that associations have been on as far as like their digital strategy goes.
Yeah, so let's just outline the entire history from the beginning of association time. If you go back really far with associations, like the farthest you can go back, like there wasn't any content online. So like the whole association was like a walled garden, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think of content in terms of just anything an association makes. And then almost when we went to web initially, it was the opposite, where it was absolutely everything except for, I guess, events is free.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2012 to maybe 2008 to 2012 was when the thought process was single sign-on. And then we went back the other way, where everything went behind the paywall and very little was outside of it. And then since then, we've been exploring various degrees of nuance based on what is the popular search at the time. So it was SEO. So we started experimenting with more bits of ungated content to like create lures or nets to pull people back in. And now that AEO is a thing, we had to reevaluate it again.
Okay, so something else that we can talk about a little bit is when it comes to that member-only content, where do we kind of draw the line around that?
Right. Okay. So I think it's really important to have member-only content as a conversion point, which I mentioned earlier. So some sort of tangible ROI that makes people say, okay, it's worth it to pay membership dues. The problem that we sometimes see in years like 2 to 5 is that often members will access the content behind the conversion point and suck it all up or whatever it was, like say it was a class or a course or they get their accreditation or whatever, or even an event, and then they are done with it. And then all of a sudden the value in the association is depleted, right? So unfortunately, we need to keep continually making content that's at that tier to keep justifying the price of the membership dues. So it doesn't have to be made at the same rate as like the free marketing content, which is like getting churned out every week, hitting all the feeds. But brewing in the background should be thought toward, can we expand our learning pathways perhaps so that the people that took course number 1 have like a next place to take this, or some kind of reason to keep paying. It used to be able to be the expectation that they're coming to the event every year at least, and maybe just the discount on that was going to be enough, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of people say like, I'll go every second year, just the economy not being as great and people not being able to justify traveling all the time. We see more and more people say, well, I'll do every second year.
So this reminds me of actually a conversation that I was just having with the CEO of a medical-based association. And really the problem that he was laying out is that he's seeing more and more every year that it's mainly the baby boomers that are at this event. And he's not seeing the millennials and the Gen Zers kind of replace the ranks, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So I asked him, like, is this like a workforce development issue, or do you think this is more of like a member benefit problem? And he said, oh, it's definitely the latter. It's definitely member benefit, is that we need to be thinking about what are we doing to actually replenish our membership and be relevant to these next generations coming in. And he like verbatim said, what we were historically doing with associations isn't going to be able to be how we move into the future. We can't maintain the status quo. This is really actually an important point, even though we're talking about gating here, because ultimately when we're talking about gating, we're talking about producing content, and content comes in many forms. It's not just say like video content or a publication. It's really just any material that you're putting out there can kind of fall underneath that word. Content needs to be produced. I'll kind of stand on that hill. It needs to be considered in terms of what it's gating. And the thing to keep in mind is when it comes to Gen Zs and even millennials is that the great question that associations have been trying to answer is, what does that generation want? Well, that generation's been growing up with more access to information than anyone in history. We all know this. And they have certain expectations about what you're going to do for them, or at least how easy it's going to be able to get what they need. There's never been more pressure on a generation to some regard in terms of, socioeconomic pressure, career opportunities. So the association really needs to have a sympathetic eye, some empathy towards asking them for membership. It's really healthy for an association to really think of themselves as a business, have a business mindset, that is. And that's not to tell anyone that you need to think of your members as dollar signs, but it's because Gen Z is thinking of you as a service. So once we understand that, we can really think about, are we providing value to these people? What kind of resources are going to draw them in to our kind of network? And then what's going to be that tipping point where they're going to consider membership?
It's tough to remember that if you don't seem like you're going to guarantee to deliver to them, they really can't afford to invest in you. It's not really about like, did it look like a cool place to be? Did it look like somewhere where they'd want to spend time and like grow their network? You basically have to prove to them that it's going to be worth their money, which is a sad place to be in, but it's true. So really, bringing it all the way back around, you need to have content on all 4 areas across the entire spectrum. So you need content that spreads awareness and builds your credibility as the voice of the industry to get out there. You need content that draws them into your pipeline as a potential lead, allowing you to continue to nurture and foster that, especially through like an email communication pipeline and things that are more directed and specific to that person. And then you need that tasty conversion content that's going to be the tipping point that we were just talking about, that's going to entice them to finally join. And then you need to keep making it so that they'll continue to renew. Otherwise, as soon as they've used it up, they'll unfortunately probably have to leave.
Yeah. And that is to not say that this is something that kind of trumps anything else that's currently working. But, when it comes to strategic planning and thinking about recruitment and retention, gating is actually an important part of that broader conversation, because, while this episode is focused on gating, it ultimately impacts think of it as it optimizes your recruitment tactics, because content is a very much a recruitment tool. And, the programs that you have, the content that you have, where you draw that line in the sand ultimately affects what the value proposition of membership is.
So that's all of the ways that you need to be gating. If you're thinking about where I might start in my gating journey, with many of our clients, we reevaluate what's gated and what isn't gated on a pretty regular basis to make sure it's keeping up with what is still considered to be valuable in the marketplace, like what's kind of getting a little older and a little less interesting, or what like might be kind of like reemerging in interest. So we just make an inventory list of everything that you have and think about it again, basically like what should be gated, what should be not gated.
So thinking categorically, you want to think about what is openly available online that we don't necessarily have something unique that no one else can contribute. Like that level of material that you have, that's basically, think of the publicly open information. Don't gate that, because it's not going to be as enticing. As you start approaching your kind of list of the content and programming that you're putting forward, when you think that you have something that you do better than no one else, and you're set up to be able to deliver something that no one else can produce, that's at the point where now you need to start considering about where your gating goes. Is that, are you going to gate it with email, or are you going to provide it as a member benefit?
Okay, that's all the time we have for today's episode. We learned why to gate, what to gate, when to gate, and basically, if we offered any more content, it would be too valuable and we'd have to gate it.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.